And I wondered if you could talk about what happens when we suddenly alphabetic texts make beings that are verbs, that are streaming gerunds of matter into objects, and how this changes our thinking. How making words into objects, taking away their vibrant, animated breath, allows for a certain kind of extractive, anthropocentric thinking.
It sure does. I mean, well, I mean, just in the most obvious, overt ways, the written words on the page have a kind of static, stuck quality. Once you're writing things down, the words and the sentences and the phrases begin to generate a kind of double of the world. They don't seem part of the flux and shift and dance of the animate shapes and forms that surround you on every hand. Rather, you come back to what you wrote down one day, and you come back the next day and it still says the same thing. And you come back a week later or a year later and it says the same thing. There's this weird timelessness, or a sense of language, our language, human language, as floating outside the world, the dancing world in which everything else lives and breathes. There's a sense, well, we start only then beginning to use words to represent the world, as if from outside, as if words were not a part of the world's presence, as if they weren't bubbling forth in the midst of the world between us and all these other beings. We start speaking about the world, about the mountain, about the weather today. You know, how's the weather today? But we're no longer speaking so easily to the world and hearing the world speaking back to us. It's something I've been trying to bring across to some of the folks here, that even our word prayer, in its most basic Aboriginal sense, it seems to me, means simply talking to things rather than talking about things, talking to the ground, calling the sun up out of the earth every dawn. So that's a huge change. And you know, I think we have to say that this is not to say that writing is bad, or that the alphabet is the cause of all our problems, or that the alphabet is evil. I'm a writer, for heaven's sakes. I love the written word and I love to read. And what we're suggesting, what I'm suggesting, and I know, or I suspect you are as well, is not that writing is bad, but rather that writing is magic. Mm-hmm. That it is a very, very potent form of magic, or animism, we could say. That, you know, you come down in the morning, you open up the newspaper and you focus your eyes on these ostensibly inert or inanimate marks on the page, and straight away you hear voices and you see visions of events happening on the far side of the world, or conversations between our president and some other head of state on another continent. This is magic. Gazing at the printed words on a page, suddenly I hear voices. This is not that different from the, Lakota woman who steps out of the village and into the forest, and her face snags on a spider web, and she, steps back, tries to catch sight of that little spinning arachnid as it's setting the struts on the web. And once she seizes it in her focus, or rather the spider seizes her eyes, she's drawn down into that other scale of experience, and suddenly, sometimes, feels herself addressed by that spider. Or a Hopi man walking outside the Pueblo and turns his attention toward a rock covered in crinkly black and red lichens and focuses his eyes on a patch of lichen and suddenly hears the boulder addressing him, speaking to him. We just do it with our own scratches and scripts. Our oral ancestors were doing it with lichen patches, spider webs, animal tracks, cloud shapes, bent twigs, with pretty much everything. So writing, as it were, and particularly alphabetic writing, is this very concentrated form of animism. So intense, so concentrated that it effectively eclipses or hides all the other modes of participation in which we used to engage. Now it's the page that speaks. It's the words on the page speak with such potency and vitality that they kind of block out the much more subtle register in which everything else is speaking.
That's beautiful. It brings to mind, I'm very interested in the simplistic understanding of the Narcissus myth. And I was thinking that you can very easily think that writing has become a kind of Narcissus, which is we've fallen in love with our own reflection in the page, and we keep speaking to ourselves. And of course, our ideas have gotten more and more narrow and have become less and less matched to the complex, tangled, always evolving reality of our ecosystems. That we're becoming, and we are stepping out of line with evolution and resilience as we have this monologic conversation. But I was also thinking about how Narcissus is actually, if we look at the myth, because this is rewilding mythology, seeing himself reflected in the water, included in, like the apparatus of a frog's eye that looks like it's the eye of the actual pond, that sees the lilies and the scum and the insects, that's what we want to see our faces reflected in that world and participate in that relationship and see that we are verbs strung together by, the interesting thing for me about sound is that we're instruments that produce a particular sound, and it communicates interiority without violating interiority. And so it creates an experience of a community where everyone understands that other beings have an inside and have an experience. And then when we're reading things, not everything is always flat. Everything is always available for capture rather than for response.
Yeah, gosh, that's so true. Because when we're speaking, I mean, our bodies resonate with one another. We pick up that vibe, that vibration, that rhythm. But it's not just us who pick it up. When we're speaking, a coyote loping past can feel something of what's being spoken of, because the humans are just like, they're gesticulating, but their voices are also caught in this sing-song exchange, right? But bing bong gadang, gong gawu kache dalawai bong gaday day day day. That is whenever we're speaking, where our voices are given to this rise and fall, this music or melody. We're kind of singing to one another, a lot like birds singing to each other. And a lot of the meaning in our vocal expressions is carried in that music, and is carried in that bodily resonance. So I think that's so key, and it's such a change when we slide into writing and just writing things down, whether on pages or now on screens. Other animals can't pick up anything of they don't know the alphabet. They don't know how to read this kind of thing or make sense. Maybe they can bite into my book and digest it that way. But what a big shift that is. But hey, I want to just jump back and say, I love this tweak or twist on the Narcissus myth, because there is a kind of healthy narcissus, a healthy narcissism that, just as you were saying so beautifully, sees ourselves a bit in everything we encounter. Doesn't see just me, because each thing that I encounter or gaze upon reflects me back, altered, refracted, changed, and gives me back to myself in some weirdly transformed manner. And so I love that. That seems really right to me. A kind of healthy narcissism. Yeah.
You know, it's so interesting. So I've heard you speak about neoliberalism and capitalism, and I oftentimes say that you know, myths are very alive. They're the air that we breathe, that we can't see, as David said. But unfortunately, it decides who lives and who dies. And one of those myths is neoliberalism and capitalism. Is this kind of very particular type of colonial take on the alphabetic abstraction made possible by writing. And so I was wondering if you could actually lay out for us what neoliberalism is, what capitalism is, and how we can begin to see the invisible web within which we're stuck.
Yeah, I'll try to do that. It's a big task.
Yeah, well, you do. I will say that you have a book that's out that talks about this. So I just want to draw attention for that. So this is just the beginning, the portal, the doorway into your more deeper dives with that.
Yeah, thank you. So really, this is a conversation about context. And what you said really struck me around the vowels and consonants. And the role of vowels was the pause, the breath, for context to be understood. And it's a very powerful metaphor for neoliberalism as well. What's happened is we've created a culture where there is no space for breath. There's no space for even the belief that there could be an alternative to our current system. You know, the famous Frederick Jameson quote, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And so the collective imaginary has been completely shaped and limited by neoliberal capitalism. And so people will say, well, I'm not a political person and I'm not interested in politics or economics. But what I'm trying to say, and many are saying the same thing, is that neoliberalism is not something outside of us. It is the oxygen that we breathe. Every aspect of our lives are mediated by capital. Where we grew up, who our neighbors are, what we do for our leisure time, what we do for our work time, what our social relations are, what our relation to the ecology is. There's no aspect of our life that's not mediated by money, right? We used to have cultures that had many ways of acquiring goods and services: gifting, bartering, fishing, hunting, gathering. We were embedded in gift economies, in economies of deep reciprocity, you know, of a kind of a covenant of reciprocal sustenance. And then through the invention of debt-based capital in the 1500s, late 1400s, early 1500s by the Medicis, and then the expansion of that through European empire, imperialism, colonialism, etc., Western European nation states went all around the world and imposed debt-based capital. And so now indigenous people cannot even fish or hunt in their own ecologies without permits and all of that. And so now there's one way to acquire goods and services, which is fiat debt-based currency. And so we think that we can achieve some forms of spiritual enlightenment outside of understanding the context. But this is the collective context we're in. And neoliberalism even mediates our spiritual lives. Who has access to yoga? Who has access to Ayurveda? Who has access to indigenous traditions, who has access to ayahuasca, all of that. And the context in which we're embedded now, this context that we can call capitalist modernity, and I like this framing of capitalist modernity. It's a term from Abdullah Öcalan, the one of the fathers of the Kurdish resistance movement, and the one of the leaders of Rojava, who's in solitary confinement in prison, in a Turkish prison, has written a beautiful series of books called Manifesto for Democratic Civilization that I highly recommend reading. But what's core about it is it's not just capitalism as a political economy, and it's not just modernity as a socio-cultural phenomena, but it's the merging of the two. And so what's happened is from this last 500 years, this sort of blip of time, we've merged capitalism with imperialism, with a very particular type of debt-based, growth-based political economy, with a very particular type of nation state run by representative democracy, merged in the patriarchy that was born from the Neolithic Revolution, merged Christian binary dualistic thought, merged Enlightenment, separation, rationalism, materialism, positivism. And then we have this sort of, and then of course, white supremacy and the Western European project of hierarchicalization and domination into this sort of perfect stew of fuckery. And this is the context that is mediating all aspects of our lives. And so one of the things I say is that the first step of this is to really be good students of our culture. Like if we spent half the time we spend on self-help and development and we did in just understanding the context in which we are enmeshed, there would already be a revolution. But we somehow have created these binaries and this dualistic thinking that the political economy is outside of me. Neoliberalism, which is just the latest chapter of capitalist modernity, it's the chapter of the story we're now in, is the dominant mythology. And so when we are crafting, recalibrating, remembering new, ancient, emerging stories and myths, we also have to understand the mythological environment, the mimetic landscape in which we are offering these stories into.
Thanks. And I think I want, because I feel like you're a person who really matches the theoretical with the practical. How can we begin to practically become good students of our culture? What does that look like?
Yeah, this is also like lifelong practice. So I think the starting place for me is really ontology. That's what the more I research into this work and study mystical practices and study political praxis and different modes of critical thinking, what it comes back to is ontology. And I know and trust, and you're going to speak a lot about ontology in this course, but onto comes from the Latin word for vision. Ontology is just a fancy philosophical word for saying our theory of being, our theory of understanding reality, the isness of the world. And so if the dominant ontology is a separatist, materialist, rationalist ontology, and I'll say what I mean by that. We are separate from the natural world. You could call this dualism. That was the original dualism of enlightenment. And then that dualism then extended to women, to indigenous people. We split nature and mind, and even in our own bodies, especially in our own bodies, the mind being the rational godlike part of us, and the body being this lower animalistic aspect of us. So this original division of dualism and separation exists in the very way in which we see the world, because we are entrained, socialized, acculturated, colonized by this worldview. It's in every textbook we've ever read. It's in the discourse of every news channel we see. It is the dominant language. It is the oxygen by which we breathe. And it then influences the very way we see the world. And then the materialist aspect of it is that we can reduce the entire world to its material constitutive parts. The entire world can be reduced to the atom to the electron, the proton, the neutron, and now with quantum physics, the quarks and the protons and what have you. But we will then find the grand unified theory of everything. This is the hubristic arrogance of the scientific materialist project. And what that reductionism does is, it may be true on one level. You know, I don't deny science. I believe in the scientific method, but I also see science as the floor of understanding, not the ceiling of understanding. It's one way to interpret the world. And what I'm gesturing towards is this transrational approach, where rationality has its place alongside intuition, the whispering and murmurs of ancestors, the wisdom of place, the dialogue with the animate cosmos and the Gaian entelechy. That these things are in conversation, in a process of co-emergent becoming. And so when we focus on the materialist reductionist worldview, we cast our gaze as such on the world. And then we marry the last part of this, which is the rationalist aspect, which is then this separate materialist world can be reduced to and understood and comprehended by the human mind. That we somehow feel that that is the natural order of things, that we are entitled to understand and subject the world to our certainty and our knowing. And the combination of these three things, the combination of dualism, separatism, of materialism and rationalism, has shaped the ontology of the Western mind, of the Occidental worldview. And we're all conditioned in it. Unless you have not been affected by globalization and capitalist modernity in some way, we have been shaped by it, right? So my computer is sitting on this wood desk that's sitting on my lap, and I see it as a separate piece of inanimate matter that I feel entitled to move and manipulate in whatever way suits my whims, as opposed to, let's say, a different ontology, which is that this piece of wood is kin that I'm in relationship with, that it has sacrificed its being to have this intimacy with me now. And then my way and my manner of approaching this being is fundamentally different. And so what activism and political action and the materialist approach, Marxism, historical dialectism, what these things would say to us is that we need to change the structure of power. And where I'm moving to is, you can change the structure of power, but if we don't change the consciousness by which we are gazing our relationality to the world, then we will just replicate the same structures over and over. That ontology is the starting place. And ontology is not a switch. We can't just go from, positivism, rationalism, materialism to animism and relationality and quantum queerness with a switch. It requires a constant vigilance. It requires a practice. It requires also shifting the very fabric of space-time and the materiality of our world and the people around us and their worldviews and their ontologies, because we're entangled with all of that. And so and I don't know if I've answered your question directly, but that's, to be a good student of our culture, we have to know the ontological gaze in which we are currently trapped and enmeshed, and then actively practice a kind of animistic memetics, a kind of liberation ontology, if you will, to find ourselves back to what our deep time ancestors understood inherently.